Hello again, everyone. I'd like to do a little more on, explore a little further what exactly happened to Otto Warmbier. Sadly, Otto has passed away, and my condolences to his family. It was a sad state of affairs. He came back home to Ohio on June 13th, and 6 days later he was officially dead. He came back in a vegetative state. But what exactly happened? His father's angry, and said the North Koreans brutalized his son. A perfectly understandable response from a grieving father. But is that what really happened? Because all we're interested in is what happened, not what we think happened. And we have to connect the dots. The best way to connect the dots on this is to look at how North Korea has treated previous American prisoners. In 20 years, there's only been 15 Americans that have been detained by the North Koreans, and 5 of those voluntarily walked across the border under their own power. They entered the country illegally. So if you disregard those 5, then there's been only 10 in 20 years. So there's 2 cases I'd like to look at that might shed a little more light on what happened to Otto Warmbier, or Warmbier. Keep saying Warmbier. The first one is Kenneth Bae, fellow here. Kenneth Bae was a Christian pastor and a minister. Now, before I get into his case, let me state right up front that it might surprise you to learn that before World War II, North Korea, the northern part of Korea, was 37% Christian. Kim Il-sung, the eternal president, was raised in a Christian home. Missionaries had come to Korea, especially the northern part of Korea, in the 1800s, the late 1800s. And they did a lot of good. They were kind of like a Peace Corps. They just didn't preach the gospel. They were like a Peace Corps, and they helped people in a lot of other areas. Nutrition, natal care, all that stuff. And then when the Japanese occupied, they incorporated the whole country of Korea into their own country, and for a while, Korea ceased to be a nation. Well, the Christian church was resistant against the Japanese occupiers. And Kim Il-sung was grateful for that. In fact, he was good friends with the Reverend Billy Graham. Here he is posing with him here. And Kim Il-sung was also, apparently got along well with Jimmy Carter when Jimmy Carter visited as a private citizen. And Jimmy Carter is a very devout Christian, made no bones about it. He talked to Kim Il-sung about Christianity. So it has a history of Christianity. I always like to say that North Korea had 2 parents, Marxist-Leninism and Christianity. And Kim Il-sung rejected both. He became an ardent agnostic and an atheist. And he kicked out Marxist-Leninism and established his own ideology, the ruling ideology of Chuch. That's another story. So anyway, keep in mind that North Korea has a history of Christianity. It's in its roots. So Kenneth Bae comes along, and he's running a tour company called Nation Tours. And he's also doing charitable work. So the North Koreans know he's a Christian, and he knows he's probably proselytizing, but they turn a blind eye to it because he's doing good. And okay, you want to tell people about Jesus, do it quietly, overtly. Don't get all up in our nose about it. And Bae was doing fine until he decided to politicize, or somebody politicized his ministry. And he got involved with an organization, Youth with a Mission, WYAM. And their idea was to infiltrate young people into North Korea, into the northern part of North Korea, up near the Russian border, Raison, and infiltrate, and they'd use a hotel as a base, and they would work to destabilize the North Korean government, regime change. Bae said, this is what Jesus wants me to do, to bring down the North Korean government. So he was bringing these people in there, and it's called Operation Jericho. And the walls of Jericho fell down, if you're familiar with the story in the Bible. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to collapse the regime. Kenneth Bae got caught. He got caught with materials that he was distributing. He violated his agreement with the North Koreans that he was supposed to confine his business to charitable endeavors, not getting involved in politics. Got involved in politics. So he was arrested in November of 2012, put on trial in April and sentenced to 15 years. Kenneth Bae was something of a whiner and a malingerer. Always something. It was, he had a bad back, bad heart, diabetes, had a fatty liver. He just was, and he was, the North Koreans took him to the hospital numerous times, had him checked out. Couldn't find anything wrong with him, took him back and put him back to work, working in hoeing crops. I guess he was hoeing or working in the fields doing something. He didn't have to work very hard. He lost 50 pounds, which he tried to say that was mistreatment, but it was actually that he was out doing physical labor and exercise because he'd been kind of a pudgy, fat guy to begin with, so he trimmed down. And he was always whining about his health. I remember reading about it, always something wrong with him. And they took him to the hospital, couldn't find anything wrong with him, brought him back. Ran all kinds of tests, no, you're fine. Shut up, back to work. And he kept whining about it until finally they released him in November of 2014 on humanitarian grounds. They go, okay, fine, we don't want to have you, in so many words, we don't want to have you die in our hands, in our custody, so go home. So once he got home, all of a sudden he made a miraculous recovery. And now he's all smiles. Oh, man, everything's wonderful. And while he said he was treated well by the North Koreans, I mean, it's difficult for him to say otherwise, because they let his mother visit him. She came for 5 days. So, he said, well, he's treated well, he wasn't mistreated, but now that he's out of there, his health has been restored. And I do remember reading somewhere that North Korea was a little perturbed about this because, they thought they'd been played. They released him because of his health. And then once he gets out of there, I mean, he's only like 45 or 46. And once he got out of there, he's like, oh, I feel fine. It's a miracle. So they were a little perturbed. And in so many words, they said, the next person that gets caught, we're going to give him the whole boom right between the horns. We're not letting him off easy. We were nice to Kenneth Bae. He played us. Next time's a different story. So we come to the second case. A young man by the name of Matthew Todd Miller, and here he is here. And Miller, in April of 2014, he came into the country through customs. And this is right out of a Monty Python sketch. I mean, he right away started acting crazy. The first thing he did was tear up his visa and ask for political asylum. So the guards came running over there and the authorities, and they talked to him, and why you tear up your visa? Why are you acting crazy? I want political asylum. They took him back, they in the room, they talked to him. What's your problem? I really came here to get arrested, he told them. He says, I want to be arrested, I want to be put in a labor camp, and I want to be able to force work, and I want to do it for like 5 years, and then when you let me out, I can go home and write a book about it, about how bad it was, and I can make some money, or whatever his motive was. But that's what he said, I want to be put in a labor camp. They said, no, what's the real reason you're acting stupid? And he said, well, he says, actually, I have a book here, a notebook, and this proves that that I'm involved with WikiLeaks, and I'm releasing secret stuff. Well, this made no sense to the North Koreans. He said, no, what's the real reason you're here? And he said, well, I have information about American military installations in South Korea, and I'll give that to you if you give me a political asylum. And the North Koreans, now they're totally confused. Probably half of them are in the other room laughing their asses off at this guy, because, what a prize specimen. Is he out of his mind? Is he crazy? So they were going to, they finally told him, said, look, we don't want to have anything to do with you. We're going to put you on the next plane out. That's it. He said, I don't want to go. I want to go to a labor camp. Really, that's what he said. I said, okay, fine. You want to go to a labor camp? We'll send you a labor camp. So they put him on trial. I think the charge was committing acts hostile to the government of the DPRK Korea, DPR Korea, and they put him in a labor camp. And so he was only there for 212 days, and he was released, Matthew Todd Miller was released on the same day that Kenneth Bae was. So there you have the two cases of Kenneth Bae and Matthew Todd Miller. Kenneth Bae violated his agreement not to mix politics with religion. And Matthew Todd Miller just acted silly. So now we come to the Otto's case. And Otto had gone to Beijing in December, late December of 2015, on a trip. He was a student at the University of Virginia. And he was from Ohio, down around Cincinnati. And so they were putting together a company called Choreo Tours. We're putting together a tour to go to Pyongyang for 5 days. So he signed up. And this was, they got there, I believe, on New Year's Eve, or New Year's Day. And there's a lot of partying. Here's Otto partying with his friends. They're having a good time. Here's having a snowball fight. So everything is wonderful, hunky-dory. There's 10 or 11 people in the group. Everything is good. And like any tour group that goes to North Korea, you have a good time. You're restricted in your movements, but the people are nice and you have a good time. Well, Otto, in the middle of the night, took it upon himself to play what was probably he thought of as a typical college prank. He's a fun-loving guy. So he sneaks out of an area where, sneaks out of his area into a restricted staff-only area. You know, when you go into some places, even like a library, and they'll have signs, staff only. You know, you see that, I see it in my library all the time. I wonder what's behind those doors. Offices, probably. But staff only. You go to any retail store, staff only, employees only. Well, he snuck into an area that was for staff. And then he took a poster off the wall, thinking he's going to sneak a poster back as some kind of, probably a trophy. And he didn't know a couple things. First, that they had closed circuit television cameras watching the whole area. And now this is a special hotel for, and there's a floor for tourists only. So that's where they take tourists, and you're confined to that area on the floor, and you have to stay there. That's part of the deal. So he took this poster, and they busted him for it. The problem is the poster had the name of Kim Il-sung on it, and here's a picture of the poster. And it's just, I made this in Photoshop and did the English translation. But you can see it's just an innocuous slogan. Like you'd see again in the break room of any retail store or corporate office. They have these slogans, cheerleader slogans, So that's what this was. For the employees of the hotel, let's do better. Every year, North Korea releases 200 or 300 official slogans, a big long list. And then you can choose from the officially approved slogans on that list, make your own posters, and put them up all over the place. That's what everybody does. And so this was obviously one of the approved slogans. So he took that, it had Kim Jong-il's name on it. Now, anything with the image or the name of Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, or Kim Jong-un, anything that bears that likeness is to be treated with reverence and respect. It's almost, but not quite, almost a sacred object. It's how I feel about the Bible, how a Muslim would feel about the Quran, you know, how a red-blooded American feels about the American flag. You know, the list goes on. There are certain objects that are in every culture that are treated with reverence. Well, you know, poor Otto had no way of knowing this. So he took down the poster and he basically defaced it. He's in trouble. Now, there may have been, when they're arguing about what they're going to do with Otto, this was in January 1st or 2nd, and they didn't get around to his trial until March, sometime in the middle of March. And they were arguing probably what they were going to do with him. The same thing as they're having difficulty with Miller. What are we going to do with this crazy guy? Well, obviously Otto had done something that was illegal, but illegal for North Koreans, not Americans. I mean, what does he know? You know, so there's probably, they wanted to release him. And, you know, so there's a faction that wanted leniency, that said, no, we got to have leniency for this guy, just like Matthew Todd Miller. But the other faction was arguing the other side of the case, because anytime, even in North Korea, when they start a discussion going, there's two sides to the argument, for and against. And you can have those robust discussions even in North Korea, except when it comes to the name of Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un. Then the discussion stops. And this is probably what happened. One side wanted leniency, and the other side says, no, 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 no. It's got the name of, you know, Kim Jong-il. He defaced the name of Kim Jong-il. The other side says, yes, but he didn't know. He didn't read Korean. What does he know? Cut the kid some slack. We can't. Ignorance is no excuse. You know, ignorance of the law is no excuse. And the leniency side said, well, you know, but all he does is just curl up on his bed in his hotel room and cry for his mother. He's not in a very good emotional state. And the hardliners said, it doesn't matter. You know, he'll get used to the situation, but it's the name of, and they wanted to prove their orthodoxy. And so the other side wanted to be lenient, relented, because they can't seem to appear weak on their reverence for the name of Kim Jong-il. So they relented and went along with the hardliners. But the hardliners probably said, and this is only a guess on my part, but I think I'm probably pretty accurate on this. The hardliners probably said, look, we're going to give him a really stiff sentence, but then we're going to tell him that he's only going to be in for a year or 18 months. Then we'll release him on humanitarian grounds, just like we did, you know, Matthew Todd Miller, and like they did Kenneth Bae. Kenneth Bae, I believe, was in there for 735 days. 2 years out of a 15-year sentence. And what Kenneth Bae did was far, far, far worse than anything Otto did. And yet they released him. So they said, look, we'll keep him, you know, 15 years, but we'll let him go after a year or so, you know, on humanitarian grounds. That way, everybody's satisfied. So that's probably what they did. Put him on trial, and then he told them, look, you're going to get the 15 years, but we're going to release you early, so cool your jets. Otto wasn't buying that. When he was finally banged up, he's like, you know, this is the end of the world. He was distraught. He was despairing. He honestly thought that he'd never see his mother or father or parents, never see his country again. And like I say, he was in a very fragile emotional state. I mean, he's crying during the trial, he's begging, he's pleading. He came up with this story about, well, they were going to give him $10,000 for the poster somebody was to hang in a church. And then they were going to give him a used car if he brought a poster home. And then if he got arrested and imprisoned, they were going to give $200,000 to his mother because his parents are very poor. Well, his parents aren't poor. You know, they're solidly middle class and above. Somebody said, well, North Koreans put these stories in his mind. But why would North Koreans want to do that? I mean, in North Korea, if you want a poster, they will sell you one. Probably 20 bucks. They'll roll it up and they'll put it in a mailer tube for you. Basically, anything you want to buy in North Korea that's not nailed down is for sale because they need the money. So if you can make a deal, they'll sell it to you. So they would have sold Otto a poster. This business about $10,000. Who would make that up in North Korea? You know, it's something Otto made up. North Koreans don't really care what your story is. Just apologize, admit you did it, you did something wrong, and apologize for it, which Otto did. I mean, he did the full kowtow, you know, from the waist, and cried and begged and pleaded, and still got the 15 years. So once he was there, he was finally the end of the trial was sometime towards the end of March, and they locked him up. And the North Koreans, when they sent him home, what was left of him, after his brain had died, when they sent him home, they sent a DVD with his medical information, the tests they'd done on him, and what they'd done. They'd done 2 MRIs, the North Koreans had. They'd done 1 MRI in April and another in July. And then they'd done a lot of other medical tests on him. And they sent this all to the doctors in the University of Cincinnati. The medical center there received all this information from the North Koreans. And physically, Otto was in excellent health. They'd taken care of him, his skin was good. They totally scanned his whole body. There was no evidence of any kind of trauma or abuse. But he wasn't there. So between the time, March, and then April when they did the first scan, that's when something happened. It could be anything. It may be that one of the prison guards became frustrated with him and wrapped a towel around his neck and tightened it up. Probably not. For this simple reason is that North Koreans, anybody that's selected to work with foreigners, and especially Americans, that's a cake job, and they have to prove their loyalty to the state, and they're very disciplined. They're very, ideologically correct and disciplined people. And they would never harm a prisoner because they can be severely punished for that. And to actually kill a prisoner, not only would they be executed, but their whole family would lose everything they had and be shipped off to a coal mine. That's the way they do things in North Korea. If you really screw up, not only are you either executed or put away for a long time, but so is your family. So I'm guessing, and not to be unfair or unkind to the family, but I'm guessing that Otto, just in his despair, because for him a year, even a year or 18 months, was a long, long time. He felt like he'd been abandoned. No one from the Obama administration looked in on him. They didn't care. The tour company, the Koryo tour company, kept asking, how is he doing? And North Koreans said, oh, he's fine, don't worry, he's fine, everything's fine. But the Obama administration didn't look at it. You know, they didn't send anybody, or I think somebody from the Swedish delegation showed up. But that was it. And so the poor fellow, in his despair, probably decided to end his own life with a shirt or a towel or something, and cut off the air to his. And the North Koreans found him and cut him down, and revived him. But by that time, his brain was gone. His brain tissue had died. So they kept him for, in my opinion, they kept him and tried to restore him back to health all this time. They did all the tests, the scans, and they were figuring there's some way they could bring him back to health. And they couldn't. Now, I don't know why this silly story they gave of botulism or a sleeping pill or whatever. That makes no sense to me. When they could have just told the truth. You know, he died in our custody. Took his own life. But then they'd have to admit that they were culpable, that they didn't keep an eye on him. You know, they took excellent care of Kenneth Bae, back and forth to the hospital. But they didn't take proper care. It never entered into the North Koreans' mind that something like this might happen. And it did. Now, that's just speculation on my part. But from what we see from Matthew Todd Miller and Matthew Todd Miller, they said they treated him excellently. They let him have his iPhone and his iPad. He could listen to his music and didn't have to work very hard. And, you know, they were probably more amused by him than anything else. And they were really angry with Bae because of what he tried to do. But they were confused with Otto. They'd never seen anybody like him. So, I mean, he was, in many ways, he was still a child. And they couldn't believe what was going on here. So that's probably what happened. And interestingly enough, Korea Tourist just came out and said, well, we're not going to take Americans anymore to North Korea. No more Americans. What actually probably happened is the North Koreans told the Korea Tourists, says, don't be bringing any more Americans in here. You know, because it's up to the tour operators to vet people coming in. And the only requirement for going into North Korea is you got to have a passport, you got to have the money to pay for it, and you can't be a journalist. Otherwise, you can go in. They don't care. You can visit. You can come from South Korea to North Korea. You can come from anywhere. It doesn't matter where you're from. You're welcome to come in. But it's up to the tour operators to determine that these people. So, for whatever reason, North Korea just probably told Korea tourists, no more Americans. Now, that's not true. There's several tour companies running in North Korea, and I'm sure they still bring in Americans. There's no restrictions on them, just on Korea tourists. Probably punished for what happened. But anyway, that's, you know, if you look at the three cases and link them together, then the first two cases probably reflect a little on what happened to Otto. And so we'll see. Anyway, that's all I have to say on that for now. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.